I was hospitalized by my sister's attack, but my parents' response was even worse. My sister smiled as her friends kicked me unconscious on our kitchen floor, but the real betrayal came when my father looked me in the eyes and said, "She wouldn't do that." For 16 years, I endured the invisible wounds of a family who refused to see my pain, until one hospital visit shattered our carefully constructed facade. This is the raw, unflinching story of how I discovered my parents never had my back and the unexpected path to healing that none of us saw coming. If you've ever felt betrayed by those who should have protected you most, this journey from darkness to cautious hope might just be the validation you've been searching for. Stay until the end to witness the moment that changed everything. Your sister loves you. She wouldn't do that. My father whispered as I lay in the hospital bed, blood still crusting in my hair from where she'd had me attacked. Growing up in Portland, there was just one rule in our house: never hit a girl. My dad, Robert, would remind me constantly, his voice stern but eyes distant, like he was reciting something from a manual rather than sharing actual wisdom. It seemed reasonable enough until I realized it left me completely defenseless against my sister Cassandra. I was 12 the first time I really fought back. Cassandra had been beating me regularly since I was 8. Slaps that turned to punches, pinches that left marks, kicks when our parents weren't looking. That morning, I'd fallen asleep outside her door after a nightmare. Our parents' room was locked, and just being near my big sister had always been comforting. My mistake was still being there when she woke up. "What are you doing, freak?" The first kick caught me in the ribs, shocking me awake. Her second kick missed as I rolled away, but her third connected with my shoulder. Something snapped inside me. I grabbed her ankle and pinched as hard as I could. Her scream was immediate, but my victory was short-lived. The guilt hit me instantly, tears streaming down my face as I apologized. Cassandra took full advantage, hitting me 10 times harder in self-defense. I went to school that day with bruises blooming across my arms. My science teacher pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay at home. I lied effortlessly, having practiced the explanation countless times. "I'm just clumsy. Fell during basketball practice." The worst part wasn't the pain. It was knowing my parents saw everything but chose to do nothing. Mom would glimpse my bruises while folding laundry, her eyes lingering before quickly looking away. Dad would hear the thumps and crying from upstairs at night, turning up the television volume instead of coming to check. They weren't blind. They were deliberately not seeing. In public, Cassandra was the perfect big sister. She'd extend her arm protectively when we crossed streets. She'd run ahead to hold doors open for strangers. She'd help me with homework when others were watching. It was all an act that made me question my own reality. By 16, I'd grown 6 inches and gained 40 pounds of muscle. Football and weightlifting became my escape and my protection. The basement gym, my sanctuary, each rep fueled by memories of times I'd been too small to fight back. Coach Miller said I had unusual determination for someone my age. If he only knew what drove me to bench press until my arms shook. Cassandra stopped hitting me when I outgrew her, but the damage was already done. Every night before bed, I'd lock my bedroom door, a habit I couldn't break, even though she couldn't hurt me anymore. Some wounds don't show on the surface, but they cut deeper than any bruise ever could. But the strange thing about growing stronger was that it changed nothing and everything at once. The physical attacks stopped, but something more insidious took their place, a cold war fought with whispers and betrayals that hurt worse than her fists ever had. By junior year, I'd found my place on the varsity football team. Coach Miller called me the quiet powerhouse, never realizing that every tackle on the field was practice for battles I fought at home. My teammates became the brothers I never had, the family that actually noticed when I was hurting. Meanwhile, Cassandra had moved on to psychological warfare, telling our parents I was using steroids when my muscle gains became too obvious to ignore. The dynamic shifted one Friday night when I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. Cassandra was in the kitchen, her voice carrying down the hall as she argued with someone on the phone. I caught fragments about her boyfriend Derek, accusations of cheating, and threats to end things. Her sobs sounded genuinely heartbroken, stirring something I'd tried hard to bury, that instinct to protect my big sister, regardless of our history. "You okay?" I asked from the doorway, immediately regretting my concern when she whirled around, eyes blazing. "Mind your own business," she snapped, then paused, studying me with calculation that made my skin crawl. "Actually, you're strong now, right? Always showing off about it." 2 days later, we were in my truck outside Derek's house. I'd agreed to confront him, partly hoping the shared mission might begin healing the chasm between us. Derek had sent Cassandra a Snapchat video of himself with her best friend Madison. I watched her replay it beside me, her face contorting with rage and humiliation. "Just scare him a little," she whispered as we approached the door. "That's all." What happened next was like something from a movie. Madison opened the door, and Cassandra pushed past her. I followed, finding Derek lounging against the wall, his smug expression faltering when he saw my size. I didn't want to hurt him, just make sure he understood the consequences of disrespecting my sister. A few choice words, maybe a shove against the wall. Instead, something primal took over, as years of suppressed anger found a deserving target. "Say Cassandra is your queen," I demanded after pinning him against the wall, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. Driving home, Cassandra seemed different, appreciative, even proud. For that brief moment, I allowed myself to believe we could rebuild something between us. "Thanks, Ethan," she said softly, touching my arm. "I won't forget this." She was right about that. A week later, Derek and Cassandra were back together. When I confronted her about it, her eyes went cold. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said dismissively. "Besides, I want to make Madison jealous." 2 days later, when our parents were out, I heard knocking at the door. I opened it to find Cassandra standing there with two guys I'd never seen before. Before I could react, they rushed me. Fists connected with my face, my ribs, my back. I tasted blood as I collapsed on our kitchen floor, Cassandra watching from the doorway as they continued the assault. They only stopped when headlights swept across the driveway. Our father was home. The revelation in the hospital room changed everything. Just when I'd given up hope of ever being believed, Uncle Keith leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father believes you, Ethan. We all do." My mind was overwhelmed with confusion, mixing with the dizzying effects of the pain medication, making it impossible to think clearly. "What? But he just said." "He was protecting Cassandra out of habit," Keith interrupted, glancing toward the door. "But when you fell asleep, he broke down. Told me everything. The bruises he'd noticed for years, the sounds at night, how he convinced himself it wasn't serious." I stared at the ceiling tiles, unable to process the shift. For years, I'd wanted nothing more than for someone to believe me. Now that it was happening, I didn't know how to feel. 3 days later, a woman named Miss Reynolds from Child Protective Services arrived at our house. Her navy pantsuit and no-nonsense bob haircut gave her an air of authority that seemed to shrink our living room. "I'm here to gather information about the home environment," she explained, opening a manila folder thick with documents. "This conversation is confidential, Ethan. You can speak freely." My father sat rigid in his armchair, eyes fixed on the floor. Mom twisted her wedding ring nervously, a habit I'd seen 1,000 times during family tensions. "Cassandra has been hurting me since I was 8. I began, the words feeling strange in the open air after being kept secret for so long. "It started as pinches and slaps, then escalated to punches and kicks. By 12, I was regularly going to school with bruises." Miss Reynolds nodded, making notes without interrupting. When I finished speaking, Uncle Keith pulled out his phone. "You need to see this," he said, showing Miss Reynolds footage from our home security cameras. The screen displayed Cassandra shoving our mother against the kitchen counter, followed by Mom's reflexive slap. "We installed cameras after some items went missing," Dad explained, his voice hollow. "We never expected to capture this." More videos followed. Cassandra screaming threats through my bedroom door. Cassandra throwing a textbook at my head when I corrected her math homework. Cassandra laughing on the phone, describing how she'd set up the attack with Derek's friends. Miss Reynolds' expression hardened. "This is extensive documentation. I need to speak with Cassandra separately." As if summoned by her name, Cassandra appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face flushed with anger. "You're all lying," she screamed, fists clenched at her sides. "They've been abusing me. That's why I had to defend myself." Miss Reynolds stood, her stance shifting subtly. "Miss Bennett, we'll speak privately. Right now, I'm concerned about your brother's safety." That night, I packed a duffel bag while Uncle Keith waited in the driveway. The familiar routine of folding clothes and gathering toiletries felt surreal, like I was preparing for a sleepover rather than leaving home indefinitely. Mom appeared in my doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching for me. "I should have protected you." I let her hug me, but couldn't return the embrace. The validation I'd craved for years had finally arrived, but it felt hollow. Where was this recognition when I needed it most? As Uncle Keith's truck pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I watched the porch light grow smaller in the side mirror. Something was ending, but I couldn't yet see what might replace it. The space between vindication and heartbreak was smaller than I'd ever imagined. Just when I thought we'd hit rock bottom, life proved it had deeper pits to offer. The 3 weeks following my move to Uncle Keith's apartment brought superficial calm. I attended school, worked out at a nearby gym instead of our basement, and slowly adjusted to the strange freedom of living without constant fear. But while my life stabilized, Cassandra's unraveled with frightening speed. She's spiraling, Mom said during one of our awkward phone calls. Missing curfew, screaming at us for no reason. She broke her laptop by throwing it against the wall yesterday. I listened without comment, uncertain if I should care after everything she'd done. Yet despite my best efforts to harden my heart, I couldn't completely extinguish concern for the sister who had once read me bedtime stories before she became my tormentor. 2 days before Christmas, my temporary peace shattered with a single phone call. Uncle Keith answered, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm as he listened. When he hung up, his face was ashen. "It's Cassandra," he said, grabbing his keys. "She took your dad's car. There's been an accident." The December night was bitter cold as we sped toward Portland General, windshield wipers fighting against freezing rain. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios, each more terrible than the last. Despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of her gone forever. We found my parents in the emergency waiting room, Mom sobbing against Dad's shoulder. His hands were wrapped in bloody gauze, his jacket torn and stained. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hospital's mechanical hum. "She was upset about something. Wouldn't say what," Dad explained, staring at his bandaged hands. "I saw her take my keys and followed in your mother's car. By the time I caught up," his voice broke. "She hit a tree at 60 miles per hour. Wasn't wearing her seatbelt. I pulled her out before the engine caught fire." Hours passed in excruciating slowness. Every time the double doors opened, we collectively held our breath, only to deflate as doctors called other families' names. The waiting room clock ticked mercilessly, marking minutes that felt like hours. Finally, a surgeon approached, his scrubs spattered with blood. "She's stabilized," he said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe concussion. The next 24 hours will be critical." The relief was overwhelming, but short-lived. A police officer appeared as we were leaving the ICU after our brief visit to Cassandra's unconscious form. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett," he said solemnly, extending a plastic evidence bag. "We found these in your daughter's possession." Inside were several prescription bottles, including medications for my father's back pain and anxiety pills prescribed to my mother. I recognized one bottle immediately. I'd caught Cassandra trying to take it from Dad's medicine cabinet weeks earlier. She had alcohol and prescription medications in her system. The officer continued, "Once she's recovered, she'll likely face charges for DUI, theft of prescription medication, and driving without a license." Mom's face crumpled. "Charges? But she needs help, not punishment." "That will be up to the court to decide, ma'am," the officer replied, his tone sympathetic but firm. Dad turned to me, his eyes haunted. "Did you know about the pills?" I nodded slowly, guilt gnawing at me even though this wasn't my fault. "I caught her once, before I left. Uncle Keith said he told you." "He did," Dad confirmed, closing his eyes briefly. "The doctor said she's been abusing prescription drugs for months. It explains a lot." We spent Christmas in the hospital waiting room, taking turns sitting with Cassandra though she remained sedated. The staff had placed a small artificial tree at the nurse's station, its cheerful lights, a stark contrast to our family's somber vigil. Watching my parents, their exhausted faces illuminated by the harsh hospital lighting, I realized they were finally confronting the consequences of their years of willful blindness. Their golden child hadn't just been a bully, she'd been crying for help in the most destructive ways possible. And now we were all paying the price for the intervention that came too late. 5 days after the accident, Cassandra finally opened her eyes. It was the beginning of something, though none of us knew exactly what. Her recovery was agonizingly slow, a painful inch-by-inch crawl back toward consciousness, then speech, then awareness of her situation. The sister who had once seemed invincible now looked impossibly fragile. Her body wrapped in casts and bandages, tubes snaking from her arms, monitors beeping steadily beside her. I visited hesitantly at first, unsure what to say to the person who had caused me so much pain yet now lay broken herself. During my third visit, I brought a gift, a sketchbook, instead of drawing pencils. You used to draw all the time when we were kids. I explained awkwardly as she stared at the package. Remember those superhero comics you made about our family? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The Incredibles totally ripped me off. It was such a normal exchange, so ordinary and sister-like, that for a moment, we both seemed startled by it. In that brief pause, I glimpsed the person she might have been without whatever demons had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. January brought changes for all of us. My parents began seeing a marriage counselor, finally confronting the cracks in their relationship that had widened into chasms over years of ignoring problems. Dad started attending a support group for families of addiction, coming home with red-rimmed eyes but a straighter spine. Mom cleaned out every medicine cabinet in the house, disposing of unused prescriptions at the police station's drop box. Meanwhile, I worked with a therapist of my own, Dr. Winters, who specialized in sibling abuse, a term I'd never heard before but which perfectly described my experience. What happened to you was real, she told me during our second session, and it wasn't your fault. Those 8 words hit me like a physical force, unlocking something I hadn't realized was caged inside me. I cried for nearly the entire hour, grieving for the childhood I should have had. When Cassandra was well enough to leave the hospital, she went directly to Riverstone, an inpatient rehabilitation facility that looked more like a college campus than a treatment center. Judge Wilson had been surprisingly compassionate during her hearing, ordering mandatory rehabilitation and therapy instead of juvenile detention. You got lucky, I told her during my first visit to Riverstone. We sat in the facility's garden, winter sunshine week, but welcome on our faces. I know, she said quietly. Dad's lawyer really came through. She looked healthier already, the haunted look in her eyes beginning to fade. They're making me do this thing, amends, where I have to own up to what I've done and how it affected people. I tensed, unsure if I was ready to hear this. Part of me wanted to run, to protect myself from more manipulation. But Dr. Winters had encouraged me to listen if Cassandra ever offered genuine remorse, not for her sake but for mine. I was awful to you, Ethan, Cassandra continued, her voice shaking. For years, I hit you. I humiliated you. I sent those guys to hurt you. And I lied about all of it. Her eyes met mine, clear and present in a way I'd rarely seen. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I understand now how wrong it was. The words hung between us, fragile but authentic. For the first time, she wasn't performing, wasn't calculating her effect. She was simply speaking truth, however painful. Why? I finally asked. Why did you do it? She took a deep breath. Dr. Sullivan, my therapist here, is helping me figure that out. Part of it was jealousy. You were always so good at everything. School, sports, making friends. People liked you instantly, and I felt like I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. That's not true. I started to protest. It felt true to me, she interrupted. And instead of dealing with those feelings, I took them out on you because. She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. Because you were there, and because I could. Something shifted in that moment, not forgiveness exactly, but a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. For the first time, I saw my sister not as a monster or a victim, but as a deeply flawed person trying to find her way back from terrible choices. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a door to a future I hadn't thought possible, one where we might someday know each other as the people we were becoming rather than the people we had been. The road to healing proved longer than any of us anticipated, winding through unexpected terrain of progress and setbacks. By early March, I was spending most nights at home again, gradually reclaiming my space and identity. I'd replaced my old posters with new ones, rearranged my furniture, and installed a lock on my door, small changes that helped me feel secure in a house that had once been my prison. Cassandra completed her inpatient rehab program in April, just as the Portland cherry trees exploded into bloom across the city. The plan was for her to stay home for 2 weeks before beginning a residential treatment program, a trial run to see if our fragile new family dynamics could withstand closer proximity. The morning of her return, I woke with a knot of anxiety so tight in my stomach that I skipped breakfast. She's different now, Mom assured me, noticing my tension. We all are. I nodded, unconvinced. Promises and reassurances had never protected me before. When I walked through the door after football practice that afternoon, I froze at the unexpected scene in our kitchen. My parents and Cassandra were sitting at the table playing Uno, of all things. Dad was laughing at something Mom had said, and for a moment, They looked like a normal family, something we'd never truly been. Cassandra looked up first, her smile faltering slightly at my obvious discomfort. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple t-shirt instead of her usual all-black ensemble. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and there was a calmness about her that seemed almost foreign. "Hey," she said softly. "Want to join? I'm crushing them." I hesitated, then set down my gym bag. "Sure. Deal me in." The first 3 days passed in a similar state of cautious normalcy. We circled each other with careful politeness, everyone trying so hard that it sometimes felt like we were actors in a play about a functional family. But on the 4th night, something shifted. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of crying, soft, muffled sobs coming from Cassandra's room across the hall. In the past, I would have buried my head under my pillow, too afraid of her unpredictable rage to offer comfort. But things were different now. I got up and padded down the hall, stopping outside her door. "Cassandra?" I knocked gently. "You okay?" The crying stopped abruptly. After a moment of silence, she called back, "I'm fine." Her voice was thick with tears despite her claim. I could have left it at that. Part of me wanted to, but instead, I asked, "Can I come in?" Another pause, then, "If you want." I opened the door to find her sitting cross-legged on her bed, hastily wiping her eyes. Her sketchbook lay open beside her, flipped to a drawing of 2 children, a boy and a girl, holding hands. The night light in the corner cast a soft glow across the room, making shadows dance on the walls. "Bad dream?" I asked, hovering in the doorway. She nodded. "About the accident. I keep seeing Dad's face when he pulled me out of the car. He looked so scared." I moved into the room, sitting cautiously on the edge of her bed. "He was. We all were." "I didn't mean to drive into that tree," she said quietly. "I was just so angry. And the pills made everything fuzzy, and I couldn't see straight." Her words tumbled out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for weeks. "I know." I cut her off gently. "No one thinks you crashed on purpose." I reached out hesitantly and let my hand rest on her shoulder. She didn't flinch away, a small miracle in itself. "Dr. Sullivan says I need to make peace with my mistakes," she continued, picking at a loose thread on her blanket. "That I can't change the past, but I can choose what I do next." Sounds like good advice. We sat in comfortable silence, the house creaking and settling around us. For the first time in years, I felt no fear being alone with my sister, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared pain and possible healing. "It's hard sometimes," she finally admitted, "living with everything I've done." "I know," I said simply, "but you're not doing it alone anymore." And in that moment, I realized the truth of my own words. None of us was alone in this process, not Cassandra with her guilt, not my parents with their regrets, and not me with my scars. We were all walking the long road of recovery together, however imperfectly. The next morning, I found Dad looking through family photo albums, pausing at pictures where Cassandra and I actually looked happy together. "Do you think we can ever be a real family?" he asked when he noticed me watching. I considered his question carefully. "I think we already are," I finally answered. "Just not the kind from television shows. We're the kind that broke apart and is trying to put the pieces back together. Some will fit differently now. Some might be missing for good. But it's still ours." He nodded, understanding the truth in my words. Cassandra left for her residential program the following week, her goodbye hug awkward but genuine. The future remained uncertain, filled with therapy appointments, treatment milestones, and the daily work of rebuilding trust. I had no illusions about the challenges ahead. True healing wouldn't come from grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but from consistent effort over time, from parents who finally acknowledged their failures, from a sister learning to manage her demons, and from my own willingness to remain open to change without sacrificing my hard-won boundaries. Some wounds may never fully heal, but perhaps they don't need to. Perhaps it's enough to keep them from reopening, to build something new around the scars. Not a perfect family, but a real one that finally sees each other clearly, with all our flaws and possibilities laid bare in the light of truth. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound, leaving scars that time alone can't heal. Through Ethan's journey, we've witnessed how truth, when finally acknowledged, can begin to mend what once seemed permanently broken. I've walked this path myself, and I can tell you that healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about building new patterns that honor your boundaries and dignity. The courage to face your truth, even when those who should protect you look away, is the first step toward reclaiming your power. If Ethan's story resonated with you, remember you're not alone in your struggle. Hit that like button if you found validation in his journey, share your own experience in the comments below, and subscribe for more authentic stories of resilience that will remind you that your pain matters and that healing, however difficult, is always possible. New stories of transformation every week.